Located on 85 acres and managed by the City of Santa Rosa's Utilities Department, the Laguna Treatment Plant services a wide geographical area with over 250,000 residents. Since its inception in 1968, our facility has increased the volume of wastewater it treats from 2 million gallons to currently around 18 million gallons daily. More than 500 miles of underground pipes bring wastewater to the plant, where water goes through 3 stages of treatment within a 24-hour period. The recycled water that leaves the Laguna plant is a high-quality, tertiary treated water that is safe from many reuse options. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Natural Resource Program. This is my program, and so of course it's the most important thing we do here. I've brought you back to an aerial view of the Laguna Treatment Plant to show you that we really are part of the Laguna. So the Laguna is very important to what we do here because we want to make sure that all the things that we're doing, taking water from one watershed, polluting it in another, cleaning it here, irrigating it over there, is not having a negative impact on the native flora and fauna, the biodiversity of the Santa Rosa Plain. So the Laguna is a very biodiverse, rich area with many species, both common and rare, and many different habitat types. And we're really part of the Laguna. And if you don't believe me, here's a picture of our 2005-06 New Year's storm where we were literally swamped by the Laguna. The Laguna is just doing its job. It's overflowing its banks, capturing water temporarily in its floodplain, absorbing that water and storm energy to slowly release it downstream. That prevents downstream flooding. It helps to process pollutants and settle out sediments. So the Laguna is made up of many different habitat types. This is one of the city farms. It's Brown Farm, located at Highway 12 and Llano Road. And on Brown Farm, we have riparian habitat type from the Laguna de Santa Rosa, as well as Gravenstein and Windmill Creek. We have grassland oak savanna, so we have 200, 300-year-old valley oak trees, and we have seasonal wetlands known as vernal pools. This is an actively farmed area, so what can we do then to return the water to the environment, grow food, we've got to eat, but also protect the native biodiversity? So some of the things we do on Brown Farm, our best management practices, include setbacks from high resource areas. So we don't farm under oak trees because that's where young seedlings are going to grow and ultimately be replacement trees for the older trees, which are, in the last 100 years or so of their life. We also have revegetated thousands of linear feet of creek frontage on all of our city properties. So Irwin Creek was historically grazed. When the city purchased the property, it was completely denuded of vegetation. So the first thing we did was put up exclusionary fencing to keep the cows out of the creek because grazing animals are good for other management on the farm. And we revegetated the creek starting back in 1992. And we are now on our next layer where our goal is to have 100 feet on either side of the creek, so a 200-foot corridor of all native plants and woody trees and shrubs, as well as the herbaceous understory that's going to be a very valuable resource to the local wildlife that moves through this corridor. We have seasonal wetlands known as vernal pools on the farms. These are areas that pond water for 3 to 5 months in the winter and are completely dry in the summer. And that physiological flip-flop from wet to dry has led to the evolution of completely unique species. So we have Sebastopol meadowfoam, only grows in and around Sebastopol, California. We have Sonoma sunshine. It's restricted to Sonoma County, as is Burke's goldfields. And we also have a genetically distinct race of the California tiger salamander, which uses these pools to breed in when they're full in the wintertime. So because these species are endemic or geographically restricted to the Santa Rosa Plain, their populations are in danger of extinction, and therefore these particular species all have protection under the federal and state Endangered Species Act. So the things that we do on the city farms must comply with best management practices, and that includes doing annual surveys so that we track these populations and make sure that they are maintaining through time. We have invasive species that have been introduced to the Santa Rosa Plain. They came from other parts of the world. They've been brought away from their parasites, their predators, their pests, and some of them grow explosively and in fact make it impossible for our native flora to persist. So we remove invasive species by whatever best means has been shown, and that's an ongoing task. We replace then the unwanted species with our desired species. So we install native trees and shrubs, and we do this primarily with volunteer groups. So the City of Santa Rosa and the Laguna de Santa Rosa Foundation co-host a group of volunteers called the Laguna Keepers, and we meet monthly at different sites throughout the laguna, and one of our primary tasks always involves the installation of native vegetation. And then lastly, the Natural Resource Program strives to educate, and especially reaching out to school-age kids, because these are tomorrow's stewards of the land, and the things we're doing today are not going to make any difference unless someone picks up the ball and continues to run with it. All right, our last stop today, you're in for a real treat. We're going to go out and explore the native plant demonstration garden and the created wetlands that are here at this site. This is a relatively new feature at the Laguna Treatment Plant. It's our native plant demonstration garden. And the garden was designed to give people who visit the treatment plant an idea about some things they might want to include in their own garden. So the first feature of the garden that's very important is water conservation. We use a lot of water in our outdoor irrigation, especially if you have a conventional lawn in your yard. Well, the lawn not only uses a lot of water, but it has very little benefit to our local wildlife. So here in this garden, these plants are currently being established on drip irrigation, water conservation, and we're using recycled water from the treatment plant. In a couple of years, when the plants are established, they will require no future water, because the plants we're using here are all native to the state of California, which experiences an annual drought every summer. The other features of the garden that promote sustainability include using our composted biosolids as a soil amendment and to create our beds. We've got recycled wood chip on all the paths. We used the benches from a company called Old Growth Again for sustainable redwood harvest, a fountain that's on a solar charger, so we have a water resource for our wildlife. And we chose plants that were specifically well suited for wildlife. Lots of pollen, lots of nectar, lots of fruit, opportunities for refugia. We have our nest boxes set up in the garden, so we've got natural mosquito control, we've got natural rodent control from barn owls, and we've got this aesthetic beauty. You may enjoy walking through the garden with one of our garden maps so that you can decide if any of these species would be something you'd like to have in your own yard. Okay, now we're going to walk over and take a look at our wetlands. This wetland located at the treatment plant gives us an opportunity to talk about how wetlands are nature's sewage treatment plant. So how does nature clean water? Well, we got all our ideas from this wetland. So what we do over in the treatment plant is very similar. In primary, we have solids settling down. In the wetland, solids settle to the bottom, and in the bottom we have an anaerobic environment. So the mud has very low oxygen levels, and bacteria and archaea are there to break the solids down. In the water itself, there's oxygen mixing in from the surface. So that's like our secondary system, where we have aeration that allows these organisms to break down all the organic material in the water. So we've got the bacteria and the protists and the microscopic animals living in there. And then the tertiary in our system is water infiltrating down through a 4-foot bed of coal. In our wetland, our tertiary treatment is water that trickles down through many layers of sand and gravel under the wetlands and gets cleaner, and that then becomes our drinking water. That's our groundwater. So we have clean water. And water isn't the only thing that wetlands do for us. So When you get an interface between wet and land, you get a real spike in your biodiversity, the number of species that are present. And that interacting web of life is going to provide a whole spectrum of different services. So these ecosystem services are things that are done for us free on the part of nature. We don't have to pay. All we have to do is allow it to function. And we get our clean water, and we get our clean air, and we get recycling of nutrients, and building our topsoil, and pollinating our crops, and protecting us from storms, and preventing erosion. All these things done free by nature as long as we give it space to function. Problem is, we didn't always recognize how valuable wetlands are. And prior to the Clean Water Act in 1972, you could fill any wetland you wanted to, and we sure did. So across the country, across the world, wetlands have been filled at an alarming rate. California has one of the worst records. It's estimated we've filled over 90% of our historic wetlands in this state. But now we recognize the value of wetlands, and we are protecting them, in some cases rehabilitating them, creating new wetlands to replace ones lost. And in that way, we provide not only all those great services, but this aesthetic pleasure of being in a beautiful place with wildlife abundant. So biodiversity is really the key to getting all those services, and that is the goal of the Natural Resource Program, to maintain biodiversity across the Santa Rosa Plain.